Welcome to the Business Insider series on innovation. I'm Henry Blodgett. Our guest today is Mark Zuckerberg. He's the founder and CEO of the modestly successful Facebook. Mark founded Facebook when he was 19 as a sophomore at Harvard. He ended up quitting Harvard, moving to California, building the company, and they now have more than 250 million users worldwide. So obviously a lot to talk about on the innovation front. Let's jump right into it. So Mark, when a company like Facebook gets to this size, gets to this level of maturity, a lot of people would sort of look at it and assume that this was the direction you set out to go the whole time. Take us back to the dorm room at Harvard. Talk about the initial idea and what the initial idea looked like relative to where you are today.
Well, so my sophomore year at Harvard, when I first built this, there was a lot of really interesting stuff going on. I mean, there were two primary things that were happening kind of at the same time. The first was, like any college student, I just spent a lot of time hanging out with my friends, right? People were studying computer science, psychology, the things that I studied, other stuff. And we just spent a lot of time talking about what we thought were the big issues with the world and how the world was going to change over the next 5, 10, 20 years. And a lot of cool stuff has come out of college conversations like that in the past. And for us, what we discussed was that the biggest trend that was going on right now was that more and more information was becoming available, right? So going back to kind of the start of the internet and mainstream when browsers were available. And since then, people have just been sharing more and more information. And that a lot of that was still being shared by a small number of companies or content producers, but that over time, people would be sharing more and more information themselves. And how that happened was a really important thing, right? So people care a lot about controlling information about themselves, their reputation, their privacy. And there was just a kind of a big question about whether the world would evolve in this way that people would have control over that themselves, or if that information would just be available. And so that's kind of, on the one hand, we spent like all this time discussing that. And then on the other hand, I just built this little thing, right? And so kind of had those conversations in the back of my head, but what I was building was this application for Harvard students, 6,000 people, to share some information about themselves and stay connected with their friends and family. And what we've basically just found since then is that application is something that almost everyone wants to use, right? Everyone has an identity that they want to express and friends and family that they want to stay connected with. And it's grown from that original 6,000 person student body to more than 250 million people across the world. And the cool irony in it is now we've actually had an opportunity to shape how that first sort of big trend that my friends and I discussed 5 years ago about more information being available and people having control over their information, we've now been able to shape a bit how that plays out. So that's been a really fun part of this.
And so go back, so I remember my sophomore year, we definitely had those kind of conversations, and I'm glad you had them. Yours sounded like a lot more philosophically helpful to the world than the ones that I remember having in that day.
Well,
so but where did this idea
we had those too. Yeah.
Where did the idea to build the application come from? I mean, were you setting out to build a company? Was it, hey, I can build this cool little technology thing that people can log into? I mean, where did that motivation come from?
Well, so I think a couple of things. I mean, I didn't want to build a company, right? I actually explicitly did not want to build a company. It wasn't even that I kind of wasn't thinking about building a company. And that's why early on, where most people would probably launch it at schools that they thought it would have the highest chance of working, what I did was I launched it at the schools that I thought would have the lowest chance of working, right? And so those were schools that already had some kind of school community. And the reason why I did that was because I wanted to know early on if this was something that that was just worth spending a lot of time on as a project. In college, I just built a whole lot of different things. I mean, that's just a passion of mine. Is
so
kind
you
of
kept doing
building
that.
things
this
very
was
quickly.
In keeping with what you
and I mean, the first version of Facebook I built in 2 weeks, right? And then we improved the application, and when it worked and spread extremely quickly at these other colleges that already had something similar to it that people were using, we figured, okay, this is something that maybe could grow to be a lot bigger. And that's when my roommates joined me, and we really started growing it aggressively.
So if you listen to people talk about entrepreneurship and innovation, there's always this tremendous focus on the idea, as if the idea is sacred and it's the person who thought of it is the one who should get full credit for it and so forth. I mean, from what you're saying, it sounds like the concept of hooking people up, Facebook and so forth, was already out there. So what was it that enabled your version of it to take off where everybody else was stuck?
Well, I think it's just a combination of execution and an idea of where you want it to go. Right, so from those conversations that I had with my friends in college, we had this very broad idea of where we thought the world should go, and that has kind of guided Facebook's development to this date. but a lot of it was also just good technical decisions, getting really smart people in to work on it. I mean, some of the smartest people that I've known were a lot of the original people who are involved in Facebook, and a lot of them are still here. You know, people who were my teachers in school, people who were my classmates, like people who, you know, just who I thought were the smartest people around, and I think that's a lot of what gets it to where it's going to go.
And so you said in the beginning you didn't want to form a company. In fact, you went out of your way to not make it that. You wanted to control the growth. When did that change?
Well, eventually what I realized, once we started getting a bunch of really smart people together, that a company
Which is still
really
sophomore year?
Yeah, I mean, I started off with my roommates, right, and then a few other people. It occurred to me that building a company was the best way to align a group of people towards building something great, right? And it's really just it's a good organizational structure where you can really reward people if they're building something that's good. You can work with partners and reward them if the products that you're developing work well. So it's a good way to get the best people involved to build something very good.
And where did you think of that? I mean, I again take myself back to sophomore year, and I may have been retarded in a lot of ways relative to you. But so where does this idea of building a company come from? Sophomore year in college, were people suggesting it to you on the outside? Had you always had this budding entrepreneurial fantasy? I mean, where does it come from?
Well, I mean, so I built the first version of Facebook in a couple of weeks, which was it was pretty quick, right? And especially for the scale that it eventually was operating at. I mean, I rented a server for $85 a month, and on that we're basically doing, I think, millions of page views a day, because we'd have, I think at some point like 10 or 20% of all Harvard students were logged in at the same time. This is just in the first week. So I mean, there was a lot of stuff that went into building the first version, but that was pretty quick. And then as it expanded, just got more and more smart people around me to join. Eventually we moved out to California. Originally when we went out there, we weren't expecting to move out there. We wanted to go out there for the summer because we had this feeling like, okay, all these great companies come from Silicon Valley. Wouldn't it be cool to spend a summer out there and get that experience? But we expected to go back to Harvard in the fall. And the thing that made it so that we didn't was that Harvard has this great policy that lets you take as much time off as you want. So we decided, okay, let's go ahead and take one semester off and continue just building things out. And more people joined our team. And at that point, we formally incorporated the company and got our investment from our first investor, Peter Thiel. And then things were just growing, and we got up to 1 million users within our first year of running the site. And then we decided, okay, let's take a second term off from Harvard. And then things kept on growing. And then we got up to about 5 million users, and then we were like, okay, let's take a whole year off. And then all right, I guess we're not really going back. But I mean, it was never this big decision where it's like, okay, at this point, I'm going to drop out of school and I'm going to start a company, and it's going to be this crazy thing. It just happened very gradually, and at each step we were just kind of doing what made sense to do next.
And it sounds like, in talking to a lot of entrepreneurs, it sounds like that's actually a relatively similar occurrence to what a lot of people have. The grain of an idea that really takes hold, especially on the internet. You see this all the time, where people put out a small product, takes off, suddenly it becomes something huge. I mean, do you think that that's a helpful way to think about innovation? Do you feel like that some people, when they say, okay, I'm going to start a company, there's just way too much planning ahead of time, get the business plan perfect, get the products perfect? I mean, this sounds like a much more organic way of doing it.
Well, one of the great things about the internet and about how quickly information flows now is these markets are very efficient, right? So with more traditional businesses, it would take often years of investment before you hit some kind of curve where you knew whether your thing is going to work. Now it's possible to build something in a weekend or 2 weeks, as the first version of Facebook worked, and just launch something and see if it addresses a market or a real use. And from there you can kind of get real-time feedback and adjust what you're doing very quickly. And it's possible for a site to get, for example, 250 million users like we have in 5 years, which is extremely quick, right? And things like that just couldn't happen like generations ago, right? So I think that just leads to a different kind of development now.
And I mean, again, going back, it sounds like the decision to drop out wasn't a one-time thing. It was keep going from there. Were your parents supportive of this? Again, you're a sophomore.
Well, so when I talked to my mom after the fact, she tells me that as soon as I went out to California for that summer, she knew I was going to drop out. So I guess, yeah, they're supportive.
And how important, as you look back on Facebook's success, or history so far, how important was coming to the Valley? I mean, if you'd stayed in Cambridge, for example, and done it.
There are companies that do both, right? So, I mean, some of the best companies are not built in the Valley. I mean, I really admire both Amazon and Microsoft, which are companies based in Seattle. for us, I think it was really valuable because I was 19 when I started this, right? And there was just so much that I didn't know. There still is, and Silicon Valley is just a great place to meet a lot of great engineers. There's a lot of infrastructure built up to help support just getting companies off the ground, whether it's the investment community or the legal community or just all these different areas. Undoubtedly, that helped us, right, in terms of designing our first data center, just all of these different things. So I think for us, that was a pretty valuable thing, although I think it can work both ways.
And you look at the model of successful technology entrepreneurs. You've obviously decided that you want to run the company. Why is that?
Well, in just my view of looking through the technology industry and its history, I think the companies that have done the best have often been led by their founders, right, or at least extremely early employees at the company. And I think that's because they often those people have a better sense of why the company was created, have a lot of credibility within the company in order to make the decisions that need to be made. The world changes so quickly, so being able to guide the company efficiently, I think, is an extremely important part of that. Someone showed me an interesting stat once that out of public companies, ones that were still run by their founders outperformed others. And I think that would be an interesting thing to look into. I don't know, obviously that's probably, someone can dispute that or question what it means, but I mean, I think that the model of having the person who's guiding the direction of the company run the company while being surrounded by a group of really talented people who are effectively managing the company and running its different areas is a very good model. But no matter what the model is, it's really important to keep in mind that it's never just one person, right? So in our case, we have just a handful of really great executives, whether it's folks like Sheryl Sandberg, who's our chief operating officer, or Mike Schrepfer, our head of engineering, who joined us from Mozilla, or Chris Cox, our head of product, who started off as an engineer at Facebook and has built some of the most innovative products here, is now our head of products. It's always a team of folks that and even more than those that I mentioned, who really are running the place.
Right, and I talked to Mark Andreessen, who in his new venture capital firm actually has the interesting statement that he's looking for founders who want to be CEOs. And again, certainly in my experience, it's often the VCs come in and they try to find a way to push the founder out gracefully and then install professional management. So it's very interesting to see that and so forth. But you start you're 19, you come out here, you got big fast. You didn't have this long period where you can make mistakes quietly or what have you. And it sounds like
we made mistakes loudly.
Yeah, exactly, that's right. And although you do have great people around, there's no question, there's some decisions that are just going to come right down to you. Do I sell the company? Are we going to roll this product? Are we going to pull back this product? And it seems to me that requires just a lot of self-confidence. And where does that come from? I mean, how are you confident in your decisions? Because you're leading thousands of people. These decisions make a very big difference to you and your users and your company and your shareholders.
Well, I mean, even the decisions that I make, I seek the input of the people around me, and the opinion is shaped by just all the smart people that we have. And it's not just a management team. I mean, it goes all the way, throughout the company. And just all the folks that we have here contribute a lot to the strategy and a lot of the ideas that we have. But, I mean, I think a lot of it goes back to what we were talking about before, is just how the company got started, right? We started this because we thought that this was one of the most important trends in this generation, was making it so that as the world became more open, that could happen in a way that was good for people, right? And that they could control their information and be empowered by this and have a voice, as opposed to other ways that it could play out. And that's always been my compass for running the company. And the decisions that we've made, whether they seem controversial or not, some of them are, some of them weren't internally. A lot of them they're just guided by that compass.
And I mean, you look back, not based on what you knew, or not based on everything's 20/20 hindsight, and obviously. I mean, are there things with the experience that you have now that you would have done differently? So for an entrepreneur coming up right out of school, running their own company, gets big fast, I mean, what would your advice for that person be as you look back?
Oh, I mean, there's so many things that I would have done differently. I think, like, in general, it's just that you make a lot of mistakes, and those are valuable mistakes, right? I think we're better off for having made most of those. But I also think that we've done a good job of staying true to to who the company is and what we started off to do. And we've also made a lot of very good technical and product decisions along the way, and good cultural decisions to make sure that we can